So anybody that says, well, we don't know if Joe knew, Joe absolutely knew. They have to say that because they can't make the incumbent president unelectable to the American people. If they say that, they're crossing a line they're not allowed to cross. But there's just a mountain of evidence sitting there right in front of all of us to see it. So when they say that there's no evidence that Joe knew, laugh. That's what they deserve. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee joins me now. Sir, good to have you back on. I do have some breaking news.
Well, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I got some breaking news just off the top. Just got it in my ear during one of the sound bites. CNN is reporting that former President Trump is going to turn himself into Fulton County Jail on Thursday, as obviously they're trying to weaponize everything they can against Trump to distract from the real scandal here with Joe Biden. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he ought to show up and say that he now identifies as Robert L. Peters and see maybe he'll get off, because that would be so much better for him. One of the things that becomes very obvious, anytime there is some bad news about Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, an expose about the money laundering, immediately there's something that's going to happen with Donald Trump. He's going to get indicted. Sure. There's going to be a new development from the prosecutors. It's just as predictable that the sun will come up in the east and set in the west. But here's what we need to focus on. You mentioned it a moment ago. I had James Comer on my show this weekend for TBN that airs on Newsmax on the weekend. Yeah. He was describing 20 shell companies, 20, that the Bidens ran this money through so it would be very hard to track. Not impossible. And to the good work of James Comer and his committee, and they're doing yeoman's work on the Oversight Committee. We wouldn't know anything if it weren't for what they're doing. But no longer can people say, well, we don't have any evidence. Actually, there is a mounting pile of evidence, the 20 shell companies, the over $21 million that just represents 1/3 of the bank records of the Bidens. We're talking about here tens of millions of dollars that flowed through the Bidens. And what is most fascinating, Rob, they didn't pay taxes on it. So you've got Joe Biden talking about everybody ought to pay his fair share of taxes.
Exactly.
Well, let's start with you, Joe and Hunter. Yeah. Pay your fair share of money that you got by laundering it from the Chinese, the Ukrainians, and the Russians.
Yeah, they should make them both kick back about $5 or $10 million to the IRS before they throw them on trial. I think that would be a fair response to what we've seen from this family. And again, just so phony in everything that they say. Exactly the same thing I think when I hear fair share. These guys were taking money from the worst places in the world and they wouldn't even pay taxes on it. These are some of the worst people in this country, and they're running the country. It's astonishing. Here was the no jail deal that they tried to give to Hunter Biden after they waited years to let the felony tax evasion charges expire, by the way. If he was a good boy for a whole 2 years, through January 2025, the department would promise not to prosecute him for anything they'd investigated thus far. That was the wording. You just don't break any rules, and we'll just throw everything else away, including any investigation into these affiliated businesses like Owasco, where all the money was pumping through when they're doing all this influence peddling around the world. How on earth can you look at David Weiss at this point? He saw all of this. He's been looking at all of this for years. He's ignored it for years. He only decided to go after charges when they got called out by the IRS whistleblowers, and then they make him special counsel. I mean, this is legitimately like third world country style behavior.
It may be worse than third world behavior. And David Weiss cannot be the special counsel in this. He just can't. And as soon as Merrick Garland develops any integrity at all, which may never happen, but somewhere that's got to be put to rest. Yeah. He cannot be the investigator because we already know that he's compromised, horribly compromised in this. But the deal that Hunter was being pitched, think about this. Rob, if this guy, Hunter Biden, were a young black male, 19, 20 years old, do you think he'd get a deal like that? That he didn't come from a family with a last name that could open doors and close the doors, particularly jail doors, and make sure he never went in? This is outrageous. And every family who has a family member who has been sent to prison for far less than what Hunter Biden did should be outraged and make very clear they're not going to be voting, not just for Joe Biden, but for any Democrat that doesn't come forward and stand up and speak out against this very, very one-sided system of justice.
Yeah, Hunter Biden should be looking at least a couple years in jail, I would say, and then you widen the investigation out to what they were doing with the family, and then you get into a whole different level of crime, which is, traitorous in nature. Governor Huckabee, it was good to have you on. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.